Thank you. Hands for me.
Thank you. We thought to introduce myself. Have a very long, difficult name. Simwemwe, Mange. But the team which I work with, they call me Tabo. So, that's a wrong name. I'm here to present the findings, the preliminary findings of the Justice Needs Survey that the project, in collaboration with the Ministry of Law and Justice and the Bureau of Statistics, implemented with the support of the European Union under the project called Support for the Reform and Strengthening of Justice, Strengthening of Governance in the Lesotho Program. I'll just provide a little bit. Okay, I'm wondering whether the team in front, this is now a presentations, and I hope from now onwards we will be doing presentations. At first we had remarks, now these are the presentations, so that maybe we need to see what is in there. But I just want to give you a brief background of the project. This is a project funded by the European Union, 100%. It's a government of Lesotho project. The agreement was signed on 8th September 2020, but the implementation started on 9th March, and it's going to be for 4 years, up to 8th March 2027. The delay was because of the COVID. You know, during that period we had the COVID issue, so the project could not start. The project is covering all 10 districts in Lesotho. Especially, we are focusing also on hard-to-reach areas in the remote. You know, when you talk about access to justice in towns, you can see we have the courts, we have the institutions, but when you go into the remote areas, you will not see these structures on the access to justice institutions. So these are just partner institutions. There are 16. I want just to mention that we are focusing on the supply side because we want to enhance the capacity. We know my colleagues who are going to present now, they are focusing on the demand. They are creating the demand so that people should be aware about the services which are available. But at the same time, you don't just create the demand. You also need to build the capacity of the institutions, especially the public institutions. The duty bearers, they have to respond effectively. So we have to support them. These are the institutions. I will not go through them. There are 16 institutions on the access to justice and governance. The objective of the project is, of course, to foster rule of law, good governance, human rights, and gender equality in Lesotho. But specifically, okay, the project has got 4 specific objectives. Specific objective number 1 is being implemented by UNDP. Our focus for the project, we have specific objective 2, 3, and 4. But for today, we are talking about specific objective number 3, which is improved access to justice for all, in particular women. Why should we say women? Because sometimes I also think about, we always talk about women, but men are also vulnerable, yeah? Is that so? Men are also vulnerable. I give an example where when men have gone out to drink, when coming, the women, they lock the men outside. Are they not vulnerable? They are also vulnerable. But we say that men are also vulnerable, but women are more vulnerable. And men have some coping mechanisms when they're in that case. For example, that man can go to a second wife, yeah? Because this is part of coping mechanism. I'm just giving an example. But women, they don't have options. They don't have a variety of options when they are vulnerable. So this is why we talk about women. Just like today, we are commemorating the International Women's Day. So specifically, we are here because of the, one of the specific objectives, 3, which is talking about improving access to justice for all, in particular women. Now, we said we supported the government of Lesotho to conduct the Justice Needs Survey. This Justice Needs Survey is the first ever in Lesotho. It's a national survey, and also in the southern region, this is the first survey conducted in the southern region. So you'd see that countries in the southern region, they are going to learn from this survey. This is a national survey. I know there are studies which are going on, also from my colleague are going to present, but this is a national survey that we covered all the 10 districts, especially to assess the experiences of people in Lesotho when it comes to access to justice, and also to assess what are the barriers when they try to access to justice. We are talking about all the people, but I know my colleagues are going to talk about women specifically, but as we are talking about all the people in Lesotho, what are the experiences when they want to access justice, and what are the barriers? The justice survey is people-centered. We are not assessing the institutions, but we are assessing how the experience happens when people have something they want to access justice. For example, there is a conflict. How do these people experience? And also, this is evidence-based. You know, I can say that from the speakers, most of the issues have been discussed, but now we are talking about where is the evidence. So the survey will provide the evidence. But today, we are not going to give you the figures. We are just going to give you what is the thematic areas, because we want to conclude the survey with also confirming the data with the Bureau of Statistics. You know, the Bureau of Statistics is a policy holder when it comes to this conducting surveys and data issues. So we want to do that. The survey explored the common legal and justice problems faced by the public, awareness of rights and available justice services, experiences in seeking help from justice institutions, and also barriers that prevent people from accessing justice. This is how the justice survey also explained. As I said, this was implemented by the Ministry of Law and Justice and the Bureau of Statistics with the support of the European Union. The project provided financial and technical support. We recruited some experts also, access to justice expert who has experience in justice service, and also the gender expert. You know, we also need to look about the dimension of gender. The survey was implemented from January to July 2025. Currently, we conducted the analysis, and we have a second draft of a report, which has also been subjected for review by different partners, including civil society organizations. So we are at a stage, we are aiming that by next month we should have a validation session and also launch the project. Because this project is under the government. It's under the government, so that they have to take it from there. The findings of the survey, I want you to listen this. I said we are working with the supply side, the public institutions, on the access to justice. So the findings are going to inform these institutions to develop policies. If there is need to review some laws, they have to review based on the evidence that is in the report and based on the recommendations. So this is the survey. Let me quickly just give you how the methodology, and it's, as I said, national survey covering all the 10 districts. We had a questionnaire that we administered in all the 10 districts. According to the Bureau of Statistics, here they have 156 enumeration areas, and we consulted 15 households per enumeration area, and target population of people aged from 14 to 70. We were targeting these people to respond. But of course, we had also some focused discussions that also focused the children. We did not leave out the children below 14. In total, we covered 2,340 households that were selected. So we interviewed 2,340 households. As I said, we had some focus group discussions with different categories of people in Lesotho. So we had 3 focus group per district, 12 participants for each. We also have some case studies that were captured during these meetings. Of course, we also had some key informant interviews where we interviewed some of the key stakeholders. For example, I know we interviewed the commissioner of police and also the legal aid, the judiciary, even the chief justice. We also consulted them as key informant interviews. So we had a wide range of stakeholders that we consulted under these key informant interviews. Now, this is just some preliminary findings. In Lesotho, we have a widespread of legal issues on everyday life, but I'll talk about mainly the family. We have percentages, but I said at this point we cannot give you the percentages. Mostly the family disputes, maintenance issues, and land disagreements are the most common ones. All these 3, you can agree with me. Who are the vulnerables? I was talking also to the Master of the High Court today, saying about it's good that you have come. The issues that we handle, the land disputes, they are the women who are suffer, the children. So you can see the most issues here are related to family disputes. You cannot talk about family disputes, maintenance issues, and land disagreements without talking women. The women are the most vulnerable on these issues. And also, the justice challenges often intersect with vulnerability. You see, vulnerability, we are talking about women. So, the women, mostly access to justice in Lesotho is often more difficult for women, children, persons with disabilities, and low-income groups. There are factors associated. I remember, if you remember, the previous speakers talked about the issues of stigma, financial constraints. You know, in terms of financial issues, if a woman is dependent of a man, usually, even if he is subjected to gender-based violence, these people will not go out because they have no alternative. So this is why we talk about women that they are more vulnerable. We have also informal and community-based solutions that are important. For example, we have the chiefs, community councils, and family elders, where the communities would want, first of all, to go before going to the formal justice system. This is where they also access justice. But you know, when it comes to gender-based violence, I know in one of the countries they have an alternative justice system that they are encouraging, but they said the gender-based violence cannot be handled by the community structures because we are talking about human rights. If somebody has been subject to gender-based violence, they said you can't go to the chief because you need to go the formal way. So these are some of the things. But here we found that mostly people, they would go to informal structures compared to the formal structures. So this is where they get support. Barriers to accessing justice. As I said, we have the percentage. Now we will provide at the end, not today because we are still working on this. There is limited awareness of legal rights and services, especially in the rural areas. These people, they don't know. I would give an example about legal aid. They don't know that we have legal aid. They don't know that we can go to legal aid to access justice. They are just suffering silently in the remote areas. They don't know about this access to justice institutions. They don't know their rights, that if their rights have been violated, they are not aware about. So also distance to justice institutions. This is obvious. The justice institutions are mostly in the central, in Maseru, and especially in the capital city. And if you go to other districts, currently we have just supported for example, the children's courts. They are not in all the districts, but we have supported to establish the children's court in Mafiteng and also in Mokotrom. The legal aid, now they were in Maseru, and recently they went to Reribe. with the support of the project, we have supported to establish offices in Mokotrong and also in Tabatseka and Culture Snake. So I hope maybe some development partners or even the next project will also support to expand, and the government to expand in all the districts in the years to come. Financial constraints, yeah, because as I said, people, for somebody has a conflict, for him or her to decide whether to go to access the courts, and yet that family does not have papa. They would prioritize to have papa in the home, and like, because for them to go to the courts, maybe they are very far, they cannot afford. So this is about something, an economic challenge that is also there. We have also complex procedures. You and me, even the judiciary, the justice sector institutions, they know that these procedures are very complex. We also adopted some procedures from maybe other countries. We need also to simplify, maybe put them in our own language so that people have to understand these procedures. But definitely, I'm telling you, the procedures are not very easy to follow. So this is one of the barriers. And gender and social barriers is coming again. Women and girls may face additional challenges. We are talking about additional challenges. Yes, men can face challenges, but women may face additional challenges, such as stigma, fear of reporting violence, or economic dependence. From the study, we also learned that women, they are not expected to report when they are subjected to gender-based violence. They are saying this is a family matter. This has to be resolved within the family. Not to go to, if a woman reports, they say, they laugh at her. Why are you reporting? You are supposed to be submissive. You don't need to report. This is how the family works. So these are things that are also the barriers. When you talk about persons with disabilities, you can agree with me, in most of the places, the justice institutions, they don't have facilities where if the court, for example, the magistrate is up there, we don't have the facilities where these people with disability can easily access the court. So these are some of the issues. And also LGBTQI persons may also experience discrimination or fear of mistreatment when seeking help. You know, for example, I'm telling they, if they want to go to report to one of the institutions, they might start now discriminating, talking about all sorts of bad issues about LGBTQI. So this is some of the gender and social barriers to that the survey has reviewed. We have percentages, as I said, but at this point, we just need to share it. The challenges to access to justice institutions, this now on the supply side, because these institutions have to respond to these issues. Basically, there is limited coordination among justice sector institutions. The project is trying to also establish, it's established with the support of the Judiciary and the Ministry of Law and Justice. We established a structure, a coordination structure called Justice Sector Coordination Forum at the national level, which is also being supported by the project and is going on well. But this, we have seen that it affects, because there is no coordination, the legal aid, the DPP, the judiciary, and maybe the probation, the police, there is no much coordination. It affects the management of cases. Then the delays, there are that delays because of lack of coordination. And we have also inadequate resources, understaffed, limited operational budgets, and inadequate facilities. I remember when they were opening the court sessions here by the Chief Justice, he mentioned as one of the challenges saying, like inadequate staff. They don't have inadequate judges, they have inadequate judges, inadequate court personnel. So this is also one of the challenges. It also affects the processes of cases. The centralized institutional structures, we talked a lot on that, and also inefficient administrative systems and outdated manual processes. This also, we know we are in a modern world where if somebody would like to access a file, manual, somebody will take 2 hours to access. While if you have a digital platform, you just punch in and find the case. We are also working with the Master of the High Court to establish an electronic system so that they should be able to access the files. So this has also contributed to the case backlogs and also delays in the administration of justice. Proposed recommendations. These recommendations can be in a policy form, in a program form, or also maybe reviewing some legal, like the laws which are existing. We need to strengthen public legal awareness and legal literacy. We are also supporting the legal aid to be conducting legal aid clinics. Part of it is also to enhance the legal awareness. People have to know their rights. They have to know these institutions. They have to know where to go. This is what we are recommending. Improve coordination among justice institutions and also expand community level justice services and support alternative dispute resolution mechanism. This is where we are talking about human rights based approach. We cannot run away from these community level justice processes, but we need to monitor because sometimes they violate some rights. So we need to monitor. If we can have a system that we need to make sure that when they are doing delivering their services, they have to also have that in mind, the human rights based approach, so that they should not violate the rights when they are also supporting these people. I'm happy in the area speakers also talked about survivor center and citizen focus. Survivor center, I hope maybe the projects to come can also look at survivor center. We are talking about, mostly we are more focused on the legal side. People, we focus that we need to go to court. We don't focus what about this victim. How do we support this victim? Psychologically, we need to do that. But mostly you'd see that we want the perpetrator to be punished. And we are happy when the perpetrator has been sent to prison. But what about the victim? We also need to consider the victim. This is also a very priority area that projects and even the government and the development partners have to look at about survivor centers. Ensure justice systems are accessible, inclusive, and responsive to needs of Basotho. Yeah, so I think this is my presentation. This is just to present the way forward from the perspective of the Justice Needs Survey, and also ensuring that ensuring that justice for women and girls is therefore a critical step toward building a fair, safe, and inclusive society. Moving forward, we want to conclude the Justice Needs Survey so that we can inform the development of policies and also maybe review of some of the existing laws. And also some programs can be developed based on this evidence-based research that was conducted in Lesotho. At this point in time, I would like to thank you for your time. Thank you for attention. Kia leboha.
Thank you, Dr. Thabo. The studies are very inclusive. I'm just thinking that, remember, if you're a woman and a woman with disability, that's double the trouble. The next presentation is from ICJ Siunudi and the People's Metrics. This is a joint presentation on reflections on GBV trends, legal responses, and community program insights. Thank you. Are you projecting more? Okay. Sorry.
Good day, Bommele Bontate, Liluna Banabes. I'm tempted to speak without a microphone. Can you all hear me at the back? You can't hear me? Oh, okay, great. My name's Lerato Caroline Khutlang. I am an admitted advocate of the Court of Law in Lesotho, currently working for the International Commission of Jurists as an associate legal advisor. I will be presenting with my colleagues, Advocate Lerato Rabatu from Sinudi Legal Center, as well as Masamo from People's Metrics. We are presenting jointly because the three organizations that I just mentioned are collectively implementing a project called Reform for Inclusion, Support and Empowerment. So I will not be projecting, but I wish to bring it to your attention that there is this document in your press package titled Reform for Inclusion, Support and Empowerment. That is what I'll be presenting on. Like May Dumeleng has already said, we are going to present on reflections on GBV trends, legal responses, and program insights. This emanates from one of our so many activities under the RISE project, a 2-year project that we are implementing with the financial support of the delegation of the European Union. The purpose of our presentation is simply to provide you with observations from our ongoing research on GBV accountability. And our research is based on 6 elements. It is focused on 6 elements, which are institutional response, accountability mechanisms, legal and policy framework, community attitudes, institutional capacity and coordination, as well as the reform and recommendations that we will provide at the end of our study. In carrying out this study, we used quite different methodologies. To mention a few, we carried out a desk research, which includes but not limited to the views report, which my colleague Masamo will come and present about, as well as the Sinudi Legal Center Gender Impact Study. We are also conducting key informant interviews with lawyers, human rights defenders, government representatives, as well as civil society organizations representatives. We are also going to conduct focus group discussions, focusing predominantly on women and LGBTQI+ survivors of gender-based violence. We have already started with the community interviews where we are interviewing men and women. Our geographic scope is quite broad, although it's not national. As far as community interviews are concerned and focus group discussions and key informants interviews, we are conducting them in the 5 districts of Lesotho, being Mokgotlo, Leribe, Maseru, Mafeteng, and Kuti. And so far, we have managed to conduct 7 successful community interviews in Mokgotlo and Mafeteng. And we've also managed to interview key informants from Maseru and Mokgotlo. Like I highlighted earlier, we are also using the views report to inform our study. And from the views report, we have collected a total of 169 lived experiences of LGBTQI+ communities. But for the purposes of this presentation, since we are commemorating women, we will only focus on the 81 lived experiences of women survivors from Lesotho, which Masamo will present on. We have already discovered quite a number of GBV trends and gender dynamics so far. We have discovered that intimate partner violence is more prevalent in LGBTQI+ communities, and that physical, sexual, and economic abuse is mostly perpetrated by men against women, whereas emotional abuse is reported predominantly as being perpetrated by women against men. In the Lesotho Highlands Water Project, where our colleagues from Sinudi Legal Center are working, we have discovered quite unique trends. This is, we realize that there is an increase in sexual exploitation of young girls and women due to influx of male laborers who are in the highlands to carry out the Lesotho Highlands Water Project Phase 2, which is usually referred to as the Pulihadi Project. We've also discovered that the numbers pertaining to teenage pregnancy and school dropouts are continuing to rise among girls. And we also discovered that transactional sex and poverty drive HIV and AIDS prevalence. Lastly, we discovered that parents and communities often do not recognize underage sexual exploitation as a legal offense, and as a result, they end up not reporting it. At this juncture, allow me to pass on the baton to my colleague Masamu, who is going to give us insights of the views report, and after that she will pass it on to Advocate Rabat, who will give us the barriers to justice and other discoveries we have so far. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lerato, for that first part of our presentation, collaborative presentation. I would like to greet everyone. My name is Masamo Lepota. I'm working with the People's Matrix Association. I'm actually the finance manager, but I think I love programs, so here and there I take part in the program matter part of my organization. So at Matrix there's an online platform which is called Views. It's a violating incident early warning system. It's an online system that helps LGBTI community members and everyone to report incidents of violation. Yes, so we have now just pulled out the data for 81 women in our views system to give an insight of what is going on with women in Lesotho. So I'll start by the first slide will be on the types of incidents that occur. So we have only picked transgender women, cisgender women, and LBQ women. I hope nobody is frustrated with this transgender women, cisgender women, and LBQ women. So transgender women are those women who are born with male-bodied women, right? It's okay, let me not go further into that. And then we have cisgender women who are mostly the usual women, cisgender women. And then we have LBQ women who are lesbians, bisexual, and queer women. So those are the stats that we took out of our views data for today's presentation. So when looking at the types of violating incidents, we found that mostly trans women complain about denial of housing as one of the incidents that are violating in the cases that we have. And then cisgender women, it's mostly exploitation, sexual assault, and physical assault. As you will see that we have a rate of 58% of cisgender women who feel exploited, and then sexual assault we have 17.1%, followed by physical assault, which is 7.3%. Coming to LBQ women, we mostly have those who felt harassment. That is a 28% of 25 LBQ women who reported their cases in the views. And then the harassment is followed by physical assault, which is at 24% of the total of 25 LBQ men who reported their cases in the views system. Moving forward, we're looking at the venue as to where the violating incident takes place or where it occurred. So for transgender women, most of them report that the cases happen in their own homes, that makes 16% of trans women who have reported the cases. And we'll see that there's a purple dot there, which also has 16%, which means transgender women, most of them are violated in their own homes, and some of them say that the violation took place on the streets. Moving forward to LBQ women, most of them report that this happens in their own homes. And then moving forward to cisgender women, they mention that this violating incident happens at someone else's home. Moving forward to who the perpetrators are, you will recall that in the presentation by the Deputy Commissioner of Police, he had mentioned that most cases that they have reflect that they mostly happen from people's relatives. So even here we have LBQ women who say that the perpetrators are their relatives. Cisgender women mention that the perpetrators are their clients or customers. This, although not specifically said or written or reflected anywhere, but due to the cases that we have, it already reflects that if 85% of cisgender women say that perpetrators are their clients, this possibly means the people who reported the cases are female sex workers. Moving forward to transgender women, a high percentage of them, which is 20%, say that perpetrators are police officers. That is followed by, okay, so those who say other, it's 20% of them who say other, but since it's undefined, then we'll move on. But the perpetrator following police officer is the relative or family member. So this means for LBQ women and transgender women, we have family members, people who we trust being reflected as the perpetrators. So the next slide is for us to see if these cases were reported or not. So cisgender women, 63.4% of cisgender women say that they did not disclose this to anyone. And then 52% of LBQ women say that they did not report it formally, but they told someone informally. And then moving to transgender women, they also say they did not report it formally. That's 60% of 15 transgender women who reported their cases, they did not report it formally. So I think it's a question of why are these cases not reported? And also a reflection on our side using the view system that we are actually helping people who are not free to report these cases formally to at least have a platform for them to report these cases. The next slide is was the incident witnessed. So transgender women say that yes, the incident was witnessed. Some people were aware that it was happening, but you might recall that although it was witnessed, it was not reported from the previous slide. So for LBQ women, they say that the case was witnessed, others were aware of it, yes, that it was happening. That's 64% of 25 LBQ women who reported their cases. So 75.6% of cisgender women say that the case was unwitnessed. You might recall that we had mentioned in the previous slides that we discovered that most of cisgender women who have reported the cases here are female sex workers. So for them to say that the case was unwitnessed, it's another red flag of what is happening to the female sex workers out there in the streets. So their cases happen in the streets, they are unwitnessed and they are unreported. And it's a good high number of female sex workers who have reported cases of violating incidences. We'll move forward to behaviors related to the cases that are reported. So transgender women claim that these cases have caused homophobia and transphobia and threats of violence to them, while LGBTQ women say they experience homophobia and transphobia and threats of violence. And then cisgender women say manipulation and discrimination occur due to this violation. The next slide is to see if people are aware of their human rights. So the question that is answered in this slide is to ask these people who have reported their cases whether they believe that their human rights were violated or not. So you will find that the red color reflects a yes on violation of human rights. So for transgender women, for cisgender women, and for LGBTQ women, they all say yes, their human rights were violated. So it's a thing of you are aware that your human rights were violated, but you did not report the cases formally. So I don't know where the question will go, but it's a matter of our people know that their human rights were violated, but they did not report. Is it because some of them feel like they are violated by the police where they feel like they need to report, or is it a matter of we don't know where to report, we don't know the formal platforms to report? Yes, but the use data tells us that they know their human rights were violated, but they were not reported. We'll move forward to, I think it's the next and the final slide of our VIS presentation, where we talk about the effects of the incident. So these women, all of them, cisgender women, transgender women, and LGBTQ women, they say that the impact of this is very psychological. So we might not be worried to see some of women roaming down the streets with psychological issues, because it might be, we don't know, but our data shows that a psychological effect is what is mostly brought about the incidences that happen to the women that we have in our data level.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Lerato Rabatu. I work for Sinudi Legal Center. As already explained, Sinudi Legal Center is an organization that work with communities affected by large infrastructure development projects, particularly the Lesotho Highlands Water Project. So my role is to provide presentation on risk factors fueling gender-based violence, particularly those that we discovered are happening within the Lesotho Highlands Water Project areas. And the first one that we discovered is in relation to compensation disputes, where there are disagreements over compensation between family members. We have cases of male siblings physically abusing their female siblings over assets left behind by their parents. The second one is an unequal gender power dynamics, where patriarchal norms and unequal decision-making power creates conditions that normalize gender-based violence. Again here, we see women being submissive to abusive husbands, because we know that culturally women are called minors. And so this is still playing a role even with our current legal framework that make the two equal partners. The third one is the economic dependency on perpetrators, where financial reliance on an abusive partner reduces the survivor ability to seek help. We know that women will be left behind at home to do chores that are not paid for, and their husbands will be at work working. And that makes women dependent on their male partners. And this is another factor that's fueling gender-based violence that we've discovered. Another one is contractor-related violence. So the presence of the contractors within the Lesotho Highlands Water Project area is one that is seemingly fueling gender-based violence. We know that where land has been expropriated, levels of poverty rise, and this exposes mostly women and girls who are now facing sexual exploitation, particularly to the contractors thereat. The other one that we've discovered is in relation to bribery and corruption, where the practices seem to obstruct justice and allow perpetrators to act with impunity. We do have also cases of girls who are being impregnated by contractors, and then the cases will be reported at the police, but the victim will be asked to abort the pregnancy, and nothing will happen to the perpetrator. In this case, the contractors. Rather, they will be moved from one camp to another. So the next one is in relation to emotional abuse of financially vulnerable men. So men who are not working within the project, they find themselves being emotionally abused by their spouses, who are now falling in love with contractors and are giving them money in return. So this is also a case, not only women but even male are facing gender-based violence. The other one is in relation to stigma against LGBTQI persons and heterosexual male survivors, where social and institutional stigma discourages them from reporting abuse and seeking support. So we have discovered certain challenges to accountability for gender-based violence as we conducted our study, and we realized that often survivors lack knowledge of legal remedies, reporting channels, institutional procedures, and mostly women and girls lack knowledge regarding their rights. Whilst barriers to reporting seemingly would look like a lack of awareness of rights and reporting channels, distrust of law enforcement, especially by LGBTQI persons, fear of discrimination or stigma, as well as a fear of social judgment, have been seen as barriers to reporting gender-based violence within this community. We do have the role players that commonly we refer gender-based violence cases to. These are chiefs, police, courts, health facilities, and the four of the service providers or role players would seem that there are challenges as well as regards these role players. Regarding the chiefs, they stigmatize the issue of gender-based violence when it comes to heterosexual male survivors and LGBTQI persons. They have this saying, and therefore, but wabontate haba reporter the GBV cases say that red flag in terms of that. The second challenge as regards the office of chiefs is where they will dismiss the male victim who has endured abuse from the wife, seemingly on account of what I've just said. And then the lack of capacity to respond to GBV cases also by our chiefs is one other challenge, as well as encouraging settlements on GBV cases. This is a major problem that we are seeing within the Lesotho Highlands Water Project areas where cases of gender-based violence, the chiefs are encouraging community members to settle. As regards chiefs, as regards police, as another role player or service provider on these issues, we also see a stigma towards LGBTQI and heterosexual male survivors, also encouraging settlements, as well as delays in investigating cases and inability to protect whistleblowers. There are specialized GBV units, but there's a limitation of resources for them to be able to act efficiently. As regards our courts, there is significant case delays, mostly caused by manual case management. And we've also discovered that even the issue of human capacity is a challenge. Secondly, survivor support is minimal. The system focuses mainly on the perpetrator. I think Ndade there mentioned survivor-centered approaches. So I think this is one other issue that touches on that. There are also allegations of corruption within our courts in handling the GBV cases. Cases are often withdrawn due to economic dependence, as I said, that women will be left behind or will not have equal opportunities when it comes to employment within the Lesotho Highlands Water Project, and this makes them dependent on their male spouses. And we have discovered that they have often withdrawn cases against their spouses where they have reached a level of court. As regards health facilities, we've discovered that there is an inadequate victim-sensitive infrastructure. There is limited psychosocial support, which takes us back also to the survivor-centered approach. And also, there are functional but inconsistent GBV-sensitive services within the health facilities that are there. Now, when we narrow it down, we observe that barriers to justice or to accessing justice for victims of gender-based violence boil down to economic and social factors, where we talked about financial independence on perpetrators by the victims, the geographic distance, transport challenges by victims. Within these remote areas, we know it's a challenge, not only in Lesotho Highlands Water Project areas, but everywhere within the country. There's also an issue of culture where the norms are tolerated. There's discrimination and social stigma, and the cultural norms and patriarchal practices undermine women's legal protection. There are also systemic challenges regarding the long court timelines and procedural delays, but also touched on that. Overburdened institutions have already indicated that the lack of enough human resource, fragmented coordination of the role players, as already mentioned, the police, the courts, and the other actors. We also see legal and policy gaps, where awareness and enforcement is still a challenge, where women and girls are still not aware of their rights, as well as the channels where they have to report to. There's also an issue of lack of accountability, particularly the perpetrators, the contractors within this project. I'll now talk about survivor support gaps that we have discovered so far. Limited psychosocial and legal assistance for survivors, cases not being handled with utmost privacy, lack of enough resources, and safety challenges for gender-based violence victims. Lack of enforcement of the Counter Domestic Violence Act, taking us back to our role players, the police and the courts, the criminal justice system, which is perpetrator-oriented, as already alluded to. And now women and girls not having meaningful participation in decision-making processes on compensation and resettlement, which is a major issue at the moment within the project area. Now, coming to our role as civil society organizations and community-based organizations, it would seem that our role remains to provide awareness and safe spaces for survivors, to bridging the gap between survivors and justice system, providing capacity building on gender-based service providers, as we've seen the challenges that they're on. However, we know that there are still challenges with the fragmented coordination, the donor influence, the short-term interventions. You know, our project will be for 2 years, and then by that, we'll still not be anywhere near fighting the evil. But the opportunity that remains for us is to continue strengthening our partnerships and formalizing the referral networks. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much, Advocate Rabatu and Masamu. Now, at this juncture, we all have a clear picture on GBV trends, the gaps, and the barriers that continue to hinder GBV accountability in Lesotho. So I will quickly go through the recommendations that we believe are necessary for us to address these gaps that have already been alluded to. Our recommendations have been categorized into 3 categories. The first category being immediate priorities, the ones that we believe need eminent attention. And then we also have medium-term reforms that may take a bit of a while. And lastly, we have long-term transformation recommendations. Now, we believe it's of utmost importance to strengthen community-level response structures in order for us to ensure GBV accountability, and to also establish national GBV coordination and accountability frameworks to amplify advocacy efforts and to curtail duplication of efforts. We also believe that it is of utmost importance for us to improve coordination across police, courts and civil society actors and any other GBV response service provider. And it goes without saying that the issue of capacity building for law enforcement and judicial actors also needs urgent intervention. Now, moving on to our medium-term reforms, like my colleagues have already said, that our justice system is rather perpetrator-orientated. I will give you a typical example of what this looks like in reality. When a perpetrator has been arrested, say, for sexual violence, and when they are still incarcerated by the Lesotho Correctional Services, when they have to appear before the court of law, they will be transported from the prison to the court with the state vehicle. Now, that vulnerable survivor out there will have to pay their way to the court. I know, legally speaking and procedurally speaking, there are measures that have been written demanding that survivors be given transport reimbursement. But it's in rare cases where they get such transportation. And the worst part is when the lunch hour strikes. The perpetrator will be driven back to the prison where he will eat a meal. But that vulnerable survivor will be there waiting at the court premises in an empty stomach. Now, my colleagues already touched on the issue of survivors being economically dependent on their perpetrators. This is what will happen to a survivor who was economically dependent on a perpetrator when that perpetrator has been arrested. Now, how are they going to fend for themselves when now that breadwinner has been arrested? So we believe that it is important for our our criminal justice to also assist that survivor out there and not just focus on the perpetrator. And we have also realized that some hotlines or confidential reporting mechanisms that have been put in place turn to jeopardize the whistleblowers' protection, you would have anonymously reported a GBV case of your neighbor, only to find out, and you would have also told the police to conceal your identity, only to find out that the whole of the village now knows. So this goes to say that there is a dire need for confidential reporting mechanisms to ensure that our witnesses or our whistleblowers are protected and hence willing to report GBV. And we have also realized that the issue of tracking these cases is quite problematic because our police institutions still use manual recording of cases. So this manual tracking becomes very difficult. So it is therefore important for case tracking and accountability systems to be digital. That way they will be efficient and speedy. And it also goes without saying that there is a dire need for psychosocial support and victim-sensitive infrastructure, because most of the survivors would complain, or rather they'll be reluctant to report their cases because when they get to the police premises, they'll now have to report or state out details of their cases in the general reception where everyone can hear. Yes, I know that in some districts, CGP unit has been given a secluded office where GBV survivors can report comfortably. But there's still a need for us to have such in different districts, even in the most remote areas of Lesotho. I'll now swiftly move on to the long-term transformation recommendations. Our programming as civil societies need to be gender transformative. And there's also a need for the provision of capacity building regarding sexual reproductive health rights to the three arms of the government, being the judiciary, the legislature, and the executive. That way, they will have the sufficient capacity to reform laws such as the limitation of access to legal abortion. And lastly, we did mention that we have seen some cultural norms that continue to worsen the GBV cases. So this goes to say that there is a need for us to have social behavioral change to reduce tolerance of abuse, and we need to empower our survivors to reduce dependency. I remember the delegation from the Ministry of Gender has already alluded to this important point. Now, wrapping up the recommendations, there's also a need for the Counter Domestic Violence Act to be enforced effectively and to have community education on laws, GBV, and rights, because you'd find that most of the perpetrators were not even aware that what they are doing is contrary to the law. Unfortunately, under the law, ignorance of the law is not an excuse. They will be arrested despite the fact that they didn't know. That is why it's important for us to ensure that they have sufficient knowledge regarding laws and GBV. Now, in the interest of time, I wish to move on to our conclusion and a call to action. You will agree with me that gender-based violence persists due to resource constraints, delays, and cultural norms. This goes to say that there is a multi-level intervention necessary, such as legislative reform, institutional accountability, survivor-centered services, and civil society engagement. And in the Lesotho Highlands Water Project, where GBV is multidimensional, driven by socio-economic, cultural, and project-related factors, their intervention will have to be as unique as their challenges. And lastly, there is an effective response. The effective response requires legal enforcement, community education, and gender-sensitive programming. Members of the press play a pivotal role in our societies. So I have 3 key messages for you members of the press. 1, GBV is systematic and intersectional, affecting women, children, and LGBTQI+ persons. The second one is legal frameworks exist, but enforcement and survivor support are weak. LGBTQI+ survivors face compounded barriers, and as such, coordinated survivor-centered reforms are urgently needed. Ladies and gentlemen and gender non-conforming individuals, this brings us to the end of the Reform for Inclusion, Support and Empowerment presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. The next presentation is from Sesotho Media, Perspectives on Transforming Gender Norms on GBV. They'll say the full title when they get here. Just one note, when you scan the QR code here, you'll find the press package when you scan the QR code. When I come back, I'll give lessons on how you scan the QR code for those born before technology. Thank you.
How are you? I like to practice and exercise my Sesotho whenever I'm in functions like this. Something struck my mind when I was watching your expressions on your faces. While we were all presenting this data, I think the impression is not to depress us, isn't it? Do we agree? Because I see depressed expressions. We are not saying it's a dire situation and there is no progress. I think I liked the opening introduction from the EUD that says in the absence of data we cannot take effective action, isn't it? So it is still a commemorative activity. We are still in a celebration mindset. However, the information that we are sharing with you is information that has been collected from thousands of individuals, mostly marginalized, mostly who will never have the opportunity to come inside a room like this. So we find ourselves as the messengers that are coming with a message back to all of us, not just us as civil society. We are also appealing to you as media to buy into the progressive action that is taken thus far. I look back myself personally as a person who grew up before this age of global cooperation in terms of taking action to improve the rights of individuals, whether they are female, whether they are LGBTQ, and that was not a very good time. It is a time that programmed and shaped most of our thinking and the thinking of most individuals who are not in these rooms. And so when we are giving this presentation, can it listen to us with your ears, with your minds, with your hearts, as well as can it with the mind of saying, where can we contribute? My names are, I think I was inspired by my older brother over there. I normally redact my name because it's too long. My names are Kudakwashe Chidakwa. I'm from Zimbabwe, and I've had the privilege and honor of working with quite a very unique team. They are here today. The organization is called Sesotho Media and Development. Our work has evolved over the past 25 years. We are a communication for behavior change organization, and we believe in playing the umbilical cord role between the experts, being you guys here, and the guys that might not have the opportunity to come and speak the same language with you. We use film as our tool for engagement. We use that as a way to try and create a meaningful space for dialogue between stakeholders. We are implementing a 3-year project with the support of the European Union. What we want to contribute towards is the transformation of gender norms. I think we all know norms, isn't it? It's the accepted attitudes and cultures. I think I was talking to you earlier. I spoke to a few colleagues. We wanted to dramatize and to do some drama and just create some sort of provocative, let's think about it, type of scenario which we could all apply, because commonly when we talk of gender-based violence, we think of it as some animal inside Kruger National Park, isn't it? Like it's somewhere out there. But I think what we are trying to also do as social media and development is to bring us to a consciousness where we appreciate that we are no longer looking at GBV as merely physical abuse or sexual abuse. There is a progressive action that has taken place, and for our country, that also took place in October of 2022 when we saw the Counter Domestic Violence Act being enacted into law. Prior to that period, I can assure you it was a very difficult time for us, because we encountered situations which you could not give any advice except go and seek counseling. Maybe go and talk to your family. Why don't they sit him down? Why is he like this? But after 2022, the work of social media and development became quite very interesting, because for the first time since the founding of the nation, we now had tools in our arsenal to ensure compliance with progressive norms from the societal perspective. So we are pushing for transformation of gender norms, but from the perspective of strengthening of domestic violence laws. In particular, we are excited to be working around the Counter Domestic Violence Act. I think I listened to the earlier speakers, and there is a agreement that norms play a very major role in terms of how people view GBV. Some of the things that happen are acceptable. You can meet a circumstance where, I remember we had one incident in Leribe, where they said if the partner does not do something to you, it means he doesn't love you. So those are entrenched beliefs that we are still working around as an organization, but with now the added advantage that there is a legislative instrument that we can use to address this. So our North Star, as said by the speakers before, we do know GBV affects quite everyone, but we know women and girls are disproportionately affected. We are an organization that is also working in the HIV space, and we know GBV is quite one of the critical drivers in terms of the increasing of the vulnerability of women and girls towards risky behaviors. When one is threatened, the choices tend not to be yours. So we are a country that is dealing with intersecting issues, and we are using this project as a platform, and as said by the Ministry of Social Development, we want to see a GBV-free Lesotho. It has to be achieved through us empowering the communities. It has to be achieved through the strengthening of legal protections and ensuring that every survivor, especially women and girls, can access justice, safety, and dignity. I think we are all of agreement, as has been expressed by all previous presenters, that Lesotho, we are a unique case study. We cannot just simply say we have high GBV. I think in some of the specific forms of GBV, we fall in the top 5s. We fall in the top 3s when you talk of things like femicide. So we are of agreement that Lesotho has one of the highest rates of violence against women globally. But we are also of agreement that progressive laws have been passed. These laws exist, isn't it? And that is something we have to kind of pat ourselves on the back. The only challenge we see sometimes is that there are implementation gaps. I think I listened to the presentation just now by Sinudi. They did not something like that on the CDVA. So there are gaps in implementation, and this leaves survivors unprotected. We are also dealing with the cultural norms that silence victims and perpetuate impunity. Let's remember that prior to 2022, even if you went to police, the commissioner will correct me, and you said, I was psychologically abused by my partner, they would ask you, what is that? Maybe he said this and this to me. Do you have a family? And all of that. So the culture plays quite a very big role, because a lot of things that you see playing out inside private rooms, GBV doesn't happen in open spaces. Most of the times it's happening inside bedrooms. It happens, and then next time when someone comes out, they come out smiling, you never see it. I think the problem with us is that we are waiting to see a black eye for us to think, okay, this one might be in trouble. But because of the Counter Domestic Violence Act, we have an expanded view, which includes psychological abuse, which includes emotional abuse, which includes economic abuse. And these, I think, they are going to help us to address this challenge as we have noted it. How do we break the cycle, Bondat? We have three proposed pillars. The first pillar, and I think I'm quite very happy that we didn't prepare these presentations together. When you were saying your recommendations, I was like, we are doing it. So you have capacity building of duty bearers to effectively implement the Counter Domestic Violence Act of 2022. It is a very young law. It's a law that has been in existence for three and a half or so years. So there's still a lot of groundwork to do, and I think the Minister of Social Development did mention that they are requesting support in terms of ensuring that all stakeholders, duty bearers, because the law gives us all a responsibility in terms of what are we obligated to do. Pillar number 2 is the increased community understanding of the legal protections that are provided for by that law. Remember, that we are not doing away with the previous legislation. I get it. We are not saying the previous laws were not working. We are simply saying that this law adds to how far we can go. So making sure that the community members understand the context of that law, especially community members in rural and very remote areas. Pillar 3, it is to challenge patriarchal norms and create safer, more equitable communities where women's rights are respected. So these are the 3 pillars that we felt need to be dealt with if we want to see some kind of progress. Now, in terms of to better understand the problem, there's often a misconception that behavior change communicators, we act in the absence of evidence, and how do we measure progress? We felt that there's need for us to conduct an evidence-based study that will give us a perspective into where are we now. We acknowledged that a good law already exists, which is a landmark law, which is survivor-centered. But the reality that we kind of had to also undertake was to answer questions like, do the communities know of their rights? Do the frontline responders understand their obligations? Are women and girls actually accessing justice through this law? So we needed evidence, not assumptions, to guide our work. Therefore, we undertook a study that commenced in November all the way through December. In terms of data collection, the analysis, it extended into January. The purpose of our study was to establish initial benchmarks that could provide actionable recommendations to shape the project implementation. We had the study in all 10 districts, and in total 555 participants, including community members, survivors, and duty bearers, took part. The methodology that was utilized, we did household surveys. We also looked at knowledge, attitudes, and perception surveys. We also looked at in-depth interviews and focus group discussions. So now, when we are looking at the study itself, we had the coverage of 40.9% reach for people that were in rural areas. We had 35.0 in terms of peri-urban and 24% in urban areas. Who were these respondents? In terms of the duty bearers, we had law enforcement, magistrates and prosecutors, we had social workers, chiefs and traditional leaders, we had health sector personnel, we had teachers, and we had educators. So these are some of the findings from this study, Bome and Bondat. In terms of recognition of the different forms of violence, we had an overwhelming response in terms of the respondents understanding, and 95.3% recognize that physical abuse is domestic violence. Only 4.7% did not recognize. So we have left in another column to say, what could this mean for women in our country? In terms of sexual abuse, 89.2% of respondents understood that sexual abuse is recognized as domestic violence, and only 10.8% is not. And I think this is something we have to celebrate as an achievement of the work that we've been doing over the years, not just as an organization, but us as civil society, the media, and other stakeholders. Now, when we come to emotional or psychological abuse, 81.8% of respondents did indicate that they understood that this was domestic violence, and 18.2% did not. In terms of economic abuse, only 56.9% understood that this was domestic violence, while 43.1% did not. Neglect, 45.7% understood that this was domestic violence, while it's 54.3% did not. So the insight here is we understood that nearly half of respondents did not recognize economic abuse, meaning we are still having situations where women have partners who control their income, can deny them work. I personally have seen that before, or waste household resources, and they do not see this as abuse. I think the previous presenters, they did note that economic abuse plays a very key role in terms of the vulnerability aspect of GBV. We also wanted to check to what extent do the respondents know the laws that protect them. We asked the question, do you know of laws in Lesotho that protect people from domestic violence? Only 11.5% of respondents responded as yes, and 80.7% responded as no, while 7.2% responded unsure. So the reality is only 1 in 10 people know laws that exist to protect them. We also asked the question, why don't women seek help? We got 76.2% of response saying most cases is because they are afraid of their partners. And then we also had an equally also higher number, 71.7%, saying they fear the stigma and shame that comes from the community. I think this was also mentioned by previous presenters. Also, the commissioner did talk about it. We also noted economic dependency as a problem, that survivors fear losing household support if the breadwinner is imprisoned. So these are the dynamics that we are dealing with when we are looking at GBV and how we should respond to it. Corruption was noted also as a challenge, where perpetrators use bribery to avoid accountability, discouraging reporting. I think Bome from Sinudi, when you were saying people are moved and things just disappear, I think this falls under this category. the weight of silence. Despite high awareness of domestic violence, even though it is as high as 79.1%, 30% of respondents are not comfortable discussing domestic violence in public. When we were asking the question on preferred reporting channels, we noted that 57.8% of respondents prefer to report their cases to the chief. And I think this is a phenomenon that is coming from our pre-2022 era, where that was the only channel. So this is why education becomes a very important thing, that we need to constantly give them the alternative routes. Police, we saw that only 26.9% feel comfortable to approach police. We also noted that 9.7% do approach family members. We noted 0.5% come to health centers. While least we get the I don't know, it's not the lion's share again. 0.4% do come to us as civil society. What does this mean? Traditional leaders are the gateway to justice for most women, but chiefs are not always trained on Counter Domestic Violence Act provisions. Health centers and NGOs critical for support are almost invisible as entry points. This was a finding from the study. When it comes to the capacity of frontliners, especially to implement the law, we noted that 26.2% of frontline professionals have received the formal training. Frontline, we mean the stakeholders that have been named by the law as strategic in implementation of that law. We have so far identified the police, the educators, the health workers, and I know that there is an expanded list, but those were critical in terms of our research. They noted the staff inadequacy, noting that 75.6% of respondents were saying they are inadequately staffed to handle domestic violence cases as expected by the law. We also noted the challenge in terms of forensic evidence collection. Only 7.1% of respondents were trained in forensic evidence collection. Protection orders, 45.2% do know procedures, while at least 45.2% do not. The analysis was strong laws exist, but the people responsible for implementation, they are underprepared, they are under-resourced and unevenly trained. How are we going to respond to this Bowman Bondat? We noted under the finding where 11.5% know protective laws, that we are going to conduct national awareness campaigns that should be in local language. We also noted under the finding that chiefs are first point of contact, that there is need for intentional training of our traditional leadership structures, our community leaders, so that they become advocates of women's rights, but within the context also of that law. Frontline responders lacking training, we noted that our response is going to be to provide capacity building workshops that are not just going to be at the national level. They have to respect the disaggregation of powers from national level to the district level up until we reach the grassroots, so that we have some kind of structured change. We also noted on economic abuse that was unrecognized, that there is need for economic empowerment programs for survivors, where we noted that 51.3% of respondents do not know of any shelters. There might be need, and there is need for us to do a mapping and expanding of the referral pathways. So far, Bomebondate, we have hit the ground running. For the last, I would say, month and a half, we have been in all 10 districts conducting our capacity building workshops for the duty bearers. And we have managed to train 100 teachers we have managed to train 45 LMPS, and we are still in progress to train at least 100 health professionals, and the remaining 50 senior leadership for police. I think the police did make a unique request to us that there is need for unique training that is just for their leadership on that law, so that they can make institutional and strategic decisions that should be able to be implemented in all the police stations throughout the country. What were the trainings focusing on? These are consultant-led trainings. So we had an expert on the law who was facilitating these. The subjects covered Counter Domestic Violence Act provisions and obligations. It was looking at survivor-centered approaches, trauma-informed care, proper documentation and evidence handling, protection order procedures. What does it mean by us including the health educators? We recognize that teachers matter. By training those 100 teachers, we believe that in all schools and the constituencies where they are coming from, the schools are safer places for young girls to come and disclose to them if they're experiencing any form of abuse. Teachers, we need to recognize that they witness signs of abuse and neglect. They know their students. So sometimes when they start seeing those signs and symptoms, maybe somebody withdrawing, even if it's not physical, they do have now the apparatus and the understanding that the law obligates, because long ago you'd meet teachers saying, I thought I should not involve myself since it was a breadwinner, or the perpetrator might have been the father. But in this case, the law places an obligation on the educators to actually be proactive. The teachers, they can link girls to protection services. Now that we have trained the 100 teachers, we believe they will be able to recognize signs of abuse in learners. They'll be able to understand the mandatory reporting obligations. They'll be able to know referral pathways for child protection. I think this one is quite interesting, because when I was fortunate enough to be part of some of the district outreaches during this exercise. You would find that in some districts there was no coordination structure at all. So those are some of those things that as organized as civil society, we are going to have to undertake to ensure that there are clear channels and coordination structures from the districts leading all the way to national level. The teachers can now educate students on their rights and safety, and the impact is that thousands of girls now have informed adults that they can trust. What does it mean by training 45 police officers? We covered areas like immediate response protocols under the Counter Domestic Violence Act, especially Section 14. We looked at risk assessment and survivor safety under Section 15. We looked at protection order procedures. We looked at survivor-centered interviewing, evidence collection for prosecution. Our next steps is that we are going to be undertaking trainings at the PTC, the Police Training College, with the senior police leadership to ensure institutional commitment and accountability. Our goal is that every station has at least one trained officer to handle domestic violence cases with competence and compassion, especially within the context of the expanded provisions within the Counter Domestic Violence Act. Where are we going next within the year? Social Media and Development within this year is undertaking 30 community level gatherings. We are going to be live streaming some of them so that we do have wider outreach. We are going to be engaging chiefs and local leaders as core facilitators. We'll be undertaking 12 radio programs on Radio Lesotho and 357 FM. We'll be broadcasting throughout in Sesotho, and our target is to reach throughout the country. We'll be featuring stories from survivors, legal explanation, and service information. We will also undertake digital campaigns where we will have 36 social media campaigns for this year. Our intention is to reach the youth through platforms like the Facebook, WhatsApp, and Instagram. And I think it's important to mention those because the law itself has provisions on abuse on technological, what they call technological abuse. So those things like where people are fighting and one decides to leak the nudes of others, etc. I'm giving it as an example again. I think our young people, they need to be informed that certain things are no longer acceptable and you can actually be held accountable under the law. One moment that our journey begins. We thought of just sharing some highlights. We have the privilege to meet together in such environments like now, but these are some of the photos from our district activities, the trainings themselves. These are our partners, they are not our participants. We have formed structures that we are going to coordinate through platforms like WhatsApp, where we will continue live communication with them. As you can see, we thought we should remind each other that at the end of the day, we represent the voiceless people out there. This photo was taken from, I believe, Tabatseka. So anytime we are seated in rooms like this, let's always remember there is a voiceless someone out there who is incapable of representing themselves. And we should always continuously appreciate that privilege to come and tell their story. This is how we do our work. This is one of our facilitators, the Deputy Center. We normally show films, but we produce them first. We locally produce them from lived experiences of people that relate to the issues we are addressing. After which we do have dialogue with the community members as part of addressing the issue. We are in partnership with the Lesotho Mounted Police Services, thanks to our former project of accountability with the LMPS. That MOU is still standing. So we are carrying on work with them. This is our lovely team, most who are not here with us today. And Kialebo Abo, Me and Bonda. Thank you.
Thank you, Sesotho Media. Very weird for Sesotho Media to present without showing us something, people talking. We are not used to. I was expecting to watch something. I'd like to call on Gender Links to provide a high-level thematic observations emerging from the GBV indicator study. Hands, you're almost there. One more presentation.
Okay, thank you, Mayor.
Thank you.
May I ask one of my colleagues to come and push the slides for me? Or maybe we can do it from here. But I want the laptop to be there. Laptop, yes, sir. Can we push the slides? Okay, thank you so much, Mayor, for giving us the opportunity to present, some of the findings that we are seeing in the study. Perhaps let me start by saying, because in the morning we started by a prayer, but let me say hallelujah. Why? Because we are coming back to you after 13 years since 2013, a 13-year evidence gap that has existed. So we're saying hallelujah and thanks to EU for giving us the resources to conduct a follow-up study here. I'm also saying hallelujah because we are gathered here as important stakeholders convening to discuss a very important topic in the country of Lesotho, where we are discussing a pandemic. We no longer call it a silent pandemic because the statistics that have been so far presented are loud. So it's not a silent pandemic, but a pandemic in itself. I'm also saying hallelujah because from our colleagues here in the EU projects that are being funded for a total of 8.45 million by the EU, I can see already complementarities in the studies. That was not there in 2013. So it's a big shout to the EU for funding all these and making the resources available. Let me just pause for a moment and introduce myself. My name is Kevin Chiramba. I'm the lead researcher in this gender links GBV indicator studies. What are the GBV indicators? What do we say when we say GBV indicators? Mainly, this is a regional study that Gender Links has been conducting since 2010 in 7 countries so far. And I must say in Southern Africa, Botswana and Lesotho are the only countries to have done these follow-up studies. This is a very expensive study because it's a comprehensive and dedicated study on gender-based violence. So thumbs up again to the EU for making the resources available for us to do this follow-up study. The indicators measure extent. What is extent? This is where we get the prevalence statistics for gender-based violence. So we have those indicators in the questionnaire that we administer to measure extent of violence. We also try to assess the drivers. What is contributing to the violence? What is bringing out the violence? What is driving? Is it substance and drug abuse? Is it these attitudes? Is it these norms that we have been talking about since morning? So we also test that. We also test in terms of finding out the support services that my colleagues here have all been alluding to since morning. We also look at the response patterns. We have been working with the CGPU to try and assess, how they are responding to the issues of violence. Maybe it's laws that are there and that have been, highlighted as progressive laws here by previous speakers. We also look at the integrated approaches. Who is working with who in Lesotho? Who are the GBV actors? How are they coordinated? What are they doing in terms of GBV coordination? Because GBV, as you might know, needs a multi-sectoral approach. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach. We all need to put hands on the deck so that we confront this beast. How do we do it? Just as a way of background, the methodology that is used administers a battery of surveys. The flagship tool that we use is called the Household and Prevalence Survey. In this case, we go to the households and administer a male questionnaire and a female questionnaire to try and understand the experiences of individuals within the households, what they are encountering almost on a daily basis. This is where we bring in our collaboration with the Bureau of Statistics to give us a sampling frame. In this particular study, our sampling frame included 225 enumeration areas that would give us to approach 4,500 respondents. For the women, we were targeting 2,700, and for the men, we were targeting 1,800. All in all, we managed to reach 2,566 women and 1,689 men. So This is the sampling frame that we were using from the BOS through our collaboration. And we went out to all the 10 districts of Lesotho, just, so that we can access those enumeration EAs. Can you go to the next slide? Let me pause for a moment and reflect a bit on the theme for the International Women's Day, where we are looking also at rights, justice, and action. What does this mean in terms of the data that we have, reflecting on this theme? Women, accessing rights, are they not being denied? So this is what we are going to show in our selected findings. We're calling them selected findings because we are still in the middle of, in fact, we have just begun the data analysis, but we are still also conducting key informant interviews, like my colleagues have also alluded to, with government ministries, the courts, traditional leaders, also to understand, even the religious leaders, also to understand what they encounter and how they are also dealing with these cases. So analysis has just begun, but we are hoping in the next 2 months will be done, and maybe first draft will be available. So in terms of the data, what the data says to us shows that women are not accessing the rights that they should be accessing. The justice is sometimes delayed or denied, but the data, what it tells us is that it prescribes the actions that need to be taken, and we are going to be learning from the data what type of actions do we need to take and when. So just to summarize, I think most of my points in the executive summary have already been said, but the issue of norms has come out strongly, and we have also picked it out in these selected findings, where we still have norms that are deeply entrenched in Lesotho society, where normalization of some of the norms that I'm going to present in my next slide, you will see them. And we also have a problem that normalizing these types of norms gives fertile ground for GBV to thrive. We've been talking about the gaps that are there between law and practice. That is the gap where GBV thrives, because what is prescribed in the law perhaps is not being implemented. So that gap already, GBV is happening. When someone does not report abuse, what is happening to the perpetrator? What is happening to the victim or the survivor? That gap is allowing GBV to survive. Financial barriers also trap survivors, and systemic failures silence the most vulnerable, including women with disabilities. In this survey, we also included as a new module where we also tested violence against women with disabilities. Some of the new modules that we also included, because as you know, GBV is evolving. In 2013, we were not measuring technology-facilitated GBV. But in this study, there's a dedicated module on technology-facilitated GBV. So when we get to the deeper analysis, we'll also be highlighting those statistics. We were also interested in understanding issues to do with reproductive coercion. What is reproductive coercion? This is where your partner may force you to become pregnant when you don't want to, or maybe they take away the pills and throw them in the bin, in the bin, so that maybe you can become pregnant, or force you to abort when you do not want to abort. Things like that come under reproductive coercion. We've also been testing those. Okay, let's go to the next slide again. So of course, I've already spoken about the numbers, so I won't repeat that slide. But anyway, let's just look at some of the statistics that are coming out from the study. We have three modules in the questionnaire that test attitudes. We test individual attitudes. We also test community attitudes towards GBV. And we also test attitudes towards rape. So we just pulled out some data that is talking about gender attitudes. This is at individual level. Let's look at what the data is saying. And I'm glad Sesotho Media we're also, alluding to some of these, trends that are actually coming out. So you will see that 34% of women agree or say that women must obey husbands. And 48% of men also say women must obey husbands. Just pause and reflect, we'll come back to that statistic. 39% of men believe men should have a final say in household matters, of women, sorry, and 60% of men believe men should have a final say in any household matters. Now this is where it gets more interesting. 67% of women believe that they need permission to work. And 73% of men believe women need permission to work. 38% of women believe women cannot refuse sex, whilst 41% of men believe women cannot refuse sex. 33% of women agree that lobola means ownership, and 44% of men also believe lobola means ownership. Now let me take you back a little to some of these statistics so that we can understand them in context. When we say 67% of women believe that they need permission for them to work, and 73% of men believe women need permission to work. What does that mean to you? It actually shows us that, men have final say, and women depend on men's decisions. They can't make decisions for them to go to work. They need permission. What if it is denied? So we're talking today about rights, justice, and action. So that is a right denied already. So what does it mean? A vicious cycle of poverty continues in the homes because the man is the only breadwinner, and the woman, if she is being abused, remains in that abusive relationship. They can't report that violence to the police because the man is the sole breadwinner. When 33% of women agree or believe that lobola means ownership, and 44% of men believe that lobola is ownership, what does it say about this culture of lobola? It's not a bad culture, but it is the misinterpretation of lobola as ownership. It means men are seeing the women as property. And that has several implications on sexual abuse, on things like marital rape and so forth, and even physical abuse like punishments. When men believe that, 44% of men believe that women, lobola is ownership, there is no dignity or equality there. So these are the norms in social media that needs to be challenged. You have picked this in your studies, even the other colleagues, you have also referred to some of these norms. So this is what we are saying, what needs to be challenged. The theme is saying rights, justice, action. This is where action is needed. Next slide. I'm so happy that I can't remember the presentation itself, but it talked about the costs of violence. That, okay, I think it's Mayor Lerato who was speaking about the perpetrator is already in the correctional center and being brought to the courts. They ride the vehicles, they come to the courts, at lunch they are taken back, right? But the victim or survivor, let me say survivor, is that the court is waiting for the court proceedings and there's no lunch for them. But do you know the cost of violence at individual level? Our study already reveals the average cost that these survivors incur in terms of medical costs, in terms of transport costs. The majority of people in this country are struggling to make ends meet. Now, if one is to part with 620 maluti to access medical costs, or 170 maluti for transport, and altogether about 790 maluti to access justice delivery or to access services related to the GBV that they've experienced. That's a lot of money. The figure might be small to some or relatively small to some, but look at it under this economic dependence lens. That's where you then understand that the figure is a huge figure. Because already in the house or in the home, money, people are struggling. And this is money that could have, be channeled maybe towards school fees or even other better programming in the household. But it is now being wasted. It's not only a cost that comes to the individual, but it's also a cost that goes to the government. Because now they are also needing to have resources to cater for more people who have been physically abused, for more people who have been, emotionally abused in terms of counseling or other services that are related to GBV. And then when it is aggregated at national level, that is where it runs into millions and billions of rands. Next slide. So why are we focusing on attitudes that enable violence? Because this should be the starting point, where if GBV prevention efforts are to gain traction, we need to transform attitudes. I think the mayor from Ministry of Gender alluded to this point where she said transforming attitudes is key to GBV prevention. This is what the data is telling us. To challenge the norms, to challenge the attitudes, to challenge male authority, to challenge this economic trapping that is there, and to also challenge the notion of marital ownership. It's even worse, next slide. It's even worse for women with disabilities because they are also dependent on the abuser. They have nowhere to report to because these abusers are their caregivers and they are afraid to lose this care or shelter or support. Maybe it could be financial support. Physical inaccessibility. No wheelchair access, services too far, no transport money because they are also dependent on the caregiver. Communication barriers for women with disabilities. They cannot speak for themselves or articulate these experiences. Late, they are stigmatized. I think this point has already been alluded to. They are often stigmatized, so they can't speak about the experiences. Fear of not being heard. No one will listen. No one will believe me. These are direct quotes from our data. The data is also revealing some trends and also some concern
and also some recommendations about the role of the media. What the respondents want or have highlighted is that they often see sensationalization of stories on GBV in the media, maybe sometimes victim blaming, or once-off stories, maybe during these commemorations like International Women's Day, or maybe the reports do not show the root causes or drivers of violence. And sometimes maybe the media may not even give help in terms of directing where support can be accessed, and little or no stories on rural experiences. What is the desired approach? It's just accurate and factual reporting, protecting survivor identities, regular coverage and follow-ups really helps, so that these issues are always being talked about, and it ignites action. There is also need to provide the context and education of why and where the GBV has occurred, including issues or information about where to get support really helps, so that the survivors know where they are directed. I think the issue of local languages has also been alluded to. We will not hammer that one. But what needs to be done in terms of action, just also to align with this theme, I think the issue of training has also been alluded, be it justice, be it into other sectors, but also members of the fourth estate also need to be trained on ethical reporting. Also the issue of survivor-centered approaches, we will not hammer that because it has already been said. Sustained attention to GBV issues. I'll pause for a moment and make you reflect when we had the HIV and AIDS outbreak or pandemic. I think we agree in this room that resources were put, all hands were on the deck, even the private sector players were also included. Now, why do we lack resources when it comes to GBV? GBV is also interrelated to HIV. So we need that kind of approach, so that enough resources, enough budgets. Action needs resources. Today we are talking about these resources from the EU. But where are the resources from the private sector? Where are the resources from the government? Do we have a national budget to respond to gender-based violence? We need that to fund these actions. And we also need to track that kind of commitment, so that we can monitor our commitments to local laws or to regional protocols like the Southern Gender Protocol on Development, or even international protocols. I think we've seen already from the data that who holds more harmful attitudes? Men, of course, with their final say. Women must obey husband. It's just the men again coming out tops. Even when we say Lobola means ownership, it's also the men who are coming up tops. Finally, ladies and gentlemen, let me take your attention to a call to action that is coming from the data that is I've just presented. There is need for bold action to prevent gender-based violence in Lesotho. Working with men and boys, I think we've heard this Lesotho translation to say monarchy. Yes, that one. Meaning men are expected to keep quiet or maybe to be strong, but they are also vulnerable. Okay. So we also need to have programs that work with men or that target men and boys. The Lobola narrative, how can this be challenged? Through your community dialogues, through the trainings that you are going to have in the field, especially challenging the ownership interpretation, because this has several severe implications to GBV, be it physical, be it emotional, be it economic, or that, be it sexual. Accessibility. Make services physically and financially accessible to women with disabilities. And not only with women with disabilities, but we've just talked about the issues of medical costs, issues of transport costs. Economic empowerment. This needs actually a huge reflection in some of the programs, because this will break the dependence cycle so women can live abusive relationships. Bodily autonomy. Promote women's right to bodily integrity. Training journalists on ethical, solution-focused GBV, I think I've already alluded to that. So in conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, these are some of the findings that we found, we just put in our data. We have just begun the analysis, but the core remains the same. It's a bold action that's needed, all hands on the deck, GBV prevention, because the data that is being shown here, it means this issue of saying rights, justice, action, is not an abstract concept. Actually, it's a measurable challenge for Lesotho, so that, you know, resources can be put where they are supposed to be put and action can happen. Because what is not budgeted for does not count. Thank you so much.
We are pressed for time. Excellent antidote. We've reached the media Q&A session of the program. So, Pikopa, somebody to help me to move the mic around. You have a question? Oh, don't choose. Thank you. So, members of the media, this, you have the floor. The main ended.
Before the meeting, I think before the media, I can just chip in to make a comment on a few things that I noted them down. I'm Senior Inspector from the Child and Gender Protection. Okay. Firstly, with regard to the challenges, I will get my boss here, Deputy Commissioner of Police, with regard to the challenges that we are experiencing as a police. I think one of them is the laws. We have got inconsistent laws in Lesotho with regard to gender-based violence. By the way, we accept the Counter Domestic Violence Act. There are no specific gender-based violence laws here in Lesotho. Police have to maneuver around all these acts that are being passed by the parliament to ensure that we charge the perpetrators of gender-based violence. For instance, for assault, we utilize the Penal Code Act, especially Section 30 of that Act. For violence against children, we utilize mostly Children's Protection and Welfare Act, especially Section 44, which is not that broad enough to ensure that we bring to book the perpetrators of violence against children. As for counter-domestic violence, I want to state here categorically that Lesotho has not operationalized that act. Even if we are talking about it here, it means we have not, as a police, charged even a single person on counter-domestic violence act since 2022. I know there are challenges with that act that have been raised by the judiciary, the prosecution, and ask the police again. For us, the police, the measure one is with regard to the what we call village justice councils, which we think need to be revisited. The section that says one has to be subjected to village justice councils, because we are of a view that survivors will be subjected to patriarchy. We know the traditional leaders or chiefs in this country are all males, by the way, you know. They are all males, and that is saying, take this woman who is a survivor back to the male, then male must ensure that he is given justice, and which we think that it imposes a major challenge. And I think, and secondly, we forgot the laws again. We do not have a law specifically to deal with technological facilitated gender-based violence. The cyberspace in Mosud is vacuum in terms of the law, and there is no law that looks into that space. No challenges with regard to online child exploitation and so on and so on. Those issues around how people utilize social media with regard to gender-based violence and so on. And that space is still vacuum. As police, once you go to the police, you are saying somebody has been spoiling on social media and so on. Clearly we are hopeless. We can't help you except if you take a civil route to approach the court. The another issue is the issue that raised by the data when was presented with regard to legal assistance and so on. Really, we are advocating as the police, especially the sector. We need to reform the legal aid in Mosud. The legal aid in Mosud, I know there is an existence of very critical legal institutions like CINUDI, I know one, CINUDI, the international jurists, which are giving legal services here in Mosud. But if you know, how do they exist? By which law? They are being registered under Societies Act. They are not registered under legal aid because they provide what you call a legal aid. Therefore, the legal aid in the country, it is not regulated, it is not coordinated. And it's one thing that one has to point out here. The fourth, or the fifth one? The fifth one that I'm much concerned is the issue of the Commissioner around the quality assurance with regard to the studies that are made. You will find that the study is being is geographically centered, but looks like the same study now has to is now being depicted as if it's a national study. So the issue of that, I have noted two things with regard to the matrix. The matrix association mentioned about the issue with regard to the LGBTI+ community, that they are being abused mostly by the police. Not because of the police officer preventing, but the issue is here, the proportion of the LGBTI and the general population, and is that an overall thing that to say police are abusing the LGBTI community in this country? Are we saying on daily basis the LGBTI, they don't meet anyone, they will meet police officers and they are being abused by police officers? Or the topic should be being specific that in accessibility to justice, because like I said, the issue of quality assurance is that from the statement that we got, or from the study that we said, every day LGBTI community are being abused by the police on the street. So from it's my understanding that what they said is like that. So I'm thinking there must be a way to look into that, with regard to the accessibility of justice to the LGBTI and the community individuals. And lastly, I think that would be for you, that from gender needs, to say, I'm sitting here as a head of a unit. You see, I'm sitting here and I'm hearing you talking about statistics. With regard to the trainings that you made with the LNPS to the CGPU, and I've never been part of that. I don't know about those things. My boss is here, we don't know about that. And that is an issue that we need to know immediately. And that we should correct it now. Once we move out here, we should have the number of my boss, so that anything that has to be the ladies with regard to the CGPU, he must know, I must know, and it's easy. I will also escalate issues to the system. But now I'm surprised that you were playing 55. Then how? Where did you get it? How did you? It's a situation. Yes. How did you get it? Why if you train somebody, if you train my police officers 45, why am I not a part of that? Because that leaves the question that the senior is not well informed about counter-domestic violence. So I thought we should mention. Thank you very much, Minister.
Thank you. Okay. Galawandat, members of the media, just as a few things from what Ndate said, since I have the floor. An advantage we have with regards to the legal aid, reforming it. We have the Legal Aid Council here today present. I know that she's undertaking the legal aid policy to try and that will inform changing of the Legal Aid Act to get coordination and uniformity and assistance. That's one. To the Counter Domestic Violence Act, I know that a lot of civil society organizations worked very, very hard to try and come up with the contribute towards the development of the legislation. And the question is, why till today not even a single case has been brought, or the police have not used the Counter Domestic Violence Act? I think that's a call to action for all of us to go back and ask all these various institutions that have issues with the Counter Domestic Violence Act for us to go back and maybe fix those issues so that the law can be implemented. Like he's saying, every single institution has issues with the act. I think maybe we should.
Can I also respond to that one?
No, that I have the floor, so that we can implement the act. I lost my train of thought there for a second, but yes. So the call to action is for us to try and work hard and ensure that the Counter Domestic Violence Act comes into operation. It shouldn't be just an act we talk about, and it says currently it means it does not have any impact. Even though we study resources,
Okay, I think it's a very good observation, and it's something that we noted as we were working on the project itself, and also based on the research itself. We are running a project for 3 years, whose core intention is to create platforms from the national level, the district level, all the way to the grassroots, respecting the differences in power dynamics and who is capable of making the amendments to the law. So in the 3 years that we are going to implement this project that we are implementing, our core intention was not to come out and cry wolf and say, no one is doing their job, the police are not doing their job, the judiciary, they are not doing their job. We felt like the law was passed, and the obligation on duty bearers is the implementation of a passed law. So as civil society, our approach was, okay, just as we did with accountability, how do we create a platform for redress? And the study that we did was meant to actually come up with those statistics, proven and actually on paper, to say, look, we've gone into all 10 districts, and like he has said, there is no case that we have seen that has been, there's no arrest that has been made, there's no judicial hearing. That is captured in that report. So now as we proceed with the project, we are still going to come back to the LNPS, to the judiciary and all other stakeholders, and use the project as a vehicle. We are coordinating the project. The project belongs to all of us, And our intention is to make sure that within the 3 years, let's all try to contribute to make sure that law is effective and is implemented. I also maybe wanted to talk about the 45. Apologies, that we will update, I think, on the protocols that we followed. I think we'll talk to you after the session. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The mic will go to the members of the media with questions. Oh, the liquor. Blanketola. No, it's fine. Are you from the media, Memory? Can we give, can we give, like, let's follow what the program says. Let's give to the members of the media. Questions. Name, media house, and your question.
Sorry, my name is Dinka Ramata. I'm a freelancer, a student of broadcasting and television at Lemkope University. I don't really have a question, but it's a question somehow. To say what is it that we're doing to bridge the gap, especially the generational gap. Because if you can look at gender-based violence in Lesotho, most of the time what is happening is that the cultural norms are playing a certain role, but also looking at the generational gap itself, it's a challenge. So I make my notes here, but I would ask to be excused to just for a few seconds, because my other phone just went off, but I hope I'll get them, find them. All right, I was thinking about closing the generational gap between the adults and the young people on understanding human rights and abuse. I understand that it requires building shared knowledge, trust and communication. But when it comes to really investing in that, in terms of making the young people lead in terms of the abuses that affect them, and also the women, you will see that it's only when we have spaces like this that you'll see that women are starting to talk. But I believe that even on social media, at schools and different spaces, we can actually promote the conversations, to have the conversations. Because as I was hearing that day talking about from the element of police, I just realized that most of the time when we fight the social media and say social media is not okay, but when is it that Lesotho and other maybe parts of Africa are going to invest in helping the influencers and also the people that maybe are active on social media to be able to talk about issues like this ones, because I can see that generational gap is a problem, but also people are taking social media as the platform whereby they start to say things that really hit them really hard. So I'm saying that some of the things that we believe they need funding, sometimes they just need empowerment more than funding. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. My name is Itabilin Kashu. I'm from Lesotho Times, Mohale FM. I want to ask Corona, what does the panelists have to say about technology facilitated gender-based violence? Because I haven't heard them talking about it. And another question is on effective execution of Counter Domestic Violence Act. What is the problem? What is the main challenge that it is not effectively executed? Thank you.
One more, then I will give it back to the panel. One more.
My name is Nzaki Madaum. I am from Newsday newspaper. Maybe mine is not a question, but maybe a request to the police. I was expecting that the police would give us, in terms of statistics, how many cases maybe were reported last year, what is the prevalent type of GBV that seems to be reported more often, like more than others. And I heard from the matrix, if I'm correct, talking about sex workers who maybe say the police often or most of the time violates them. And this saying has been going on for the longest time. I just want to understand from the police what they are doing about this, or is it the case of saying sex work is not legal in the country and they are taking advantage of that?
Okay, the mic to the table. Who's reacting to the question about, to the issue raised about closing the generational gap? Raised by Megdinel. Any reactions?
Okay, thank you, Mayor, for raising the issue of the issue about social media and also bringing the generational gap. I think I've alluded also in my presentation that attention to GBV must be sustained. So what does that mean if we are talking about social media? There's a saying that goes like turning lemons into oranges. Why don't we do that and use social media as a platform to articulate these GBV issues and appeal to the youngsters where they are, because they are on Facebook, they are on Instagram, they are on LinkedIn, they are on Twitter or X. So why are we not, or why can we not use those platforms and move away from the negativity that bombard us every day on our phones and channel the energy to talk about GBV in a sustained way, in ways that appeal to the younger generations? What do they understand on GBV? Do they even understand GBV? Maybe that would be the first point. How do you articulate these issues on Instagram? How do you articulate these issues on LinkedIn? How do you do that via blogs? How do you do that via X, where they spend maybe most of their time on? So maybe these are some of the issues that when we say, let's talk about gender-based violence, let's find solutions. Let's also not forget the issue of social media. We cannot say social media is negative and not see perhaps the silver lining that it gives us and to address these issues. But also education is important. What is the country doing, perhaps via the Ministry of Education, to break these generational gaps? What is in the curriculum? Perhaps we also need to interrogate on that. So that would be my contribution. I hope other panelists can also chip in.
Okay. Reaction to what are the studies saying about the technology facilitated GBV?
Thank you very much, Bommele Bondade. Well, currently our study has not yet checked. Personally, I'm going to refer to the Reform for Inclusion and Support and Empowerment project. Our current study has not yet discovered any issues of technologically facilitated gender-based violence. Maybe it's because we have so far implemented in the most rural areas of Lesotho where internet is not as accessible as it is in Maseru or in other urban areas. But to answer your question, yes, maybe you're right. Technologically facilitated gender-based violence is evolving and is evolving rapidly. And most of the common TFGBV forms in Lesotho are cyberbullying and sextortion. Sextortion is simply the act of using someone's pornographic or private pictures as a way of retaliating to whatever you would have done to them. And recently, we just came across an incident of an artificially intelligent generated child pornography where somebody had used AI to develop a pornography depicting children. And this goes back to the point that was alluded to by the Lesotho Mounted Police Services, that currently we do not have sufficient laws. Yes, I know that some of the provisions of the Counter Domestic Violence Act do mention TFGBV, but not in detail. In order for us to sufficiently address TFGBV, we need to look at the issues such as the legal identity of artificial intelligence and to determine the liability determine how liability will be addressed in the event where somebody used AI to infringe on another's rights. So your question is very important, and as you members of the press, I would like to take this opportunity to task you to raise awareness about TFGBV because it is evolving rapidly. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you once again, Madam Chair. I will also refer to the gender-based violence indicator study that Journalists has been conducting. I think I mentioned in my earlier remarks that we have this year we have a dedicated module on technology facilitated GBV. I think with about 20 questions asking all these various forms of TFGBV, including whether the survivors have also reported TFGBV to the police, kind of assistance that they've got, services that they've also accessed in terms of TFGBV. This is new data that is coming for the SWIC2. In 2013, we did have this is a new module that we are going also to be analyzing, but we have not analyzed the data yet. So maybe you can just hang on there. Maybe in a month or two, we will now have the first draft, including that analysis.
Thank you. Get the mouthful, the following are yours. Should I remind you? Okay. 1, what is the challenge with implementing the Counter Domestic Violence Act? 2, how many cases, I was expecting that you would present how many cases were reported in 2025 and the prevalence. What form of GBV were prevalent in 2025? 3, what are the police doing about GBV experienced by sex workers? Mayor was reiterating that this is a recurrent theme. Yes, that.
Thank you very much. The first question I will get to that the senior inspector needed to deal with. I will attempt to answer the issue pertaining to violence against the sex workers or violation of human rights against sex workers. Even though the issue of violation of rights against the sex workers is not yet substantiated, because it has been stated in a general term. So we don't know how the rights have been violated, the nature of the rights that have been violated. But most of the issues that we always encounter regarding sex workers, they normally come to the police claiming that they have not yet been paid and then seek police intervention. If you look at Section 55 of the Penal Code, actually prohibits prostitution, and that's what makes matters difficult for us to deal with issues of sex workers, particularly when one claims that he was engaged in a criminal activity that has been prohibited by the law, and then he wants the police intervene. It makes it very difficult. Lawyers will agree with me that we cannot try to enforce something that is illegal. That's what makes it very difficult for us. Because if somebody approaches the police and then says that, well, we did this and this, and then there was a misunderstanding when it comes to the payment, clearly we cannot enforce that. That's where the problem is. So unless the issue of violation of human rights of sexual workers is substantiated, we normally, with regard to other issues, we normally handle them. And but the main problem is this one of prostitution, which is prohibited by the Penal Code Act 2010. It has already been stated that we don't have the cyber law in Lesotho, and it makes it difficult for us when we receive reports regarding anything to do with cyber law. We resort to other acts of parliament, such as the Penal Code and any other law. But if there are no specific provisions that deal with the issues that we are facing, we become helpless. So as regards the statistics, I can assure you that on request we can provide statistics, but we are very cautious that it's not being misused. Sometimes you may find that it attacks us that we are. In fact, when it is the statistics that we provide. Sometimes I remember there was the local newspaper that requested to be provided with those stats, which we provided, but thereafter, we received the criticisms that we were not doing enough and stuff like that, but without actually taking our sides. While we know that there are lots of challenges that we always face, of which we believe that our views regarding the statistics ought to have been sought. As regards the operationalization of the domestic act, may I kindly hand over the mic to the Senior Inspector DD2.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, sir. With regard to the Counter Domestic Violence Act, initially we were told that the act, there must be, the Chief Justice must formulate what we call the judges' rules with regard to that act, so that judicial officers can be able to implement that law. And at one stage, I remember I was called to the meeting here in Masego, where the chief magistrate here in Masego designated one magistrate to deal with counter domestic violence. And in that meeting, I still remember it was us, the police, the legal aid was there, and the judicial. One stakeholder that is so crucial, that was not there, was the prosecution. So when we take cases to the prosecutions, and I still recall at one time I think it was last year for me, around April, I charged one perpetrator with that act, and the other charges get assault and sexual offense, and I also quoted provisions of the counter domestic, and the prosecutor informed me that they are still not using this law, so he will charge the perpetrator with the penal code and sexual offences. Really, with regard to the counter, you can't really get the real gist of what is really making with regard to that law. When the other department will say the police are not bringing the doggets, when we are saying doggets are ready for us, doggets are ready, and we often take doggets to your office, to your offices, and once we are there, they give them alternative charge. So it's a very complex issue that we still really don't have a real thing that we can say this is what is happening, and we are at this stage to solve this matter. And the other thing I remember at one meeting was that the government or the parliament will just enact the law without informing stakeholders that there will be this kind of law, and now they are subjected to ensure that the law is operationalized while they are still not offered or given enough resources to implement the law. For instance, on this one they were saying they now have to have what you call a family court. It means they still have a normal magistrate, they had a land court and they were not informed. They still have children's court and they are still struggling there. And now they have to establish what? The family court again. So those are arguments that are being raised. For us, the police really, we are a law enforcement agency. We don't usually reject laws. As much as we see the gaps within the law, but we are saying part of those law can be implemented, but some they are really difficult to implement unless certain things are being ironed out.
Thank you. Second round of questions. Second round of questions and follow-ups. While everybody's still pondering, I'd like to give the Legal Aid Council the mic. I stopped her earlier. Legal Aid Police, Legal Aid Act, you are reacting to that. Okay. Follow up, second round of questions. Anything? No questions, everything is crystal clear. The articles are going to be proper on Thursday. And the captions. Going once, going twice, going 3 times. Okay. Ki ya leboha. That's full of message Gender Links for today. Would like to thank Gender Links for bringing us together today. And I'd like to call on the Lesotho I'd like to call on the Lesotho Council of NGOs to give a summary of key messages and official closing. To members of the media, you can have, from here we'll have lunch after the LCN officially closes. We'll have lunch, and after lunch, I know that our speakers, the table, they're available for setting up one-on-one media interviews. So you can schedule how you're going to interview them. Galewa from me. Bye-bye. See you later. Galewa.
Thank you, Mayor. Good afternoon, everyone. Afternoon, everyone. Yeah, better. I know for someone to stand
between human beings and the last item on the program, which is already been announced. It's a mammoth task. And nonetheless, thanks for this opportunity. And let me also applaud. Can we give them a round of applause, the presenters, please, before even I start? A thunderous one, please. A thunderous one, please. I know it's been a long day. So, Mapita is my name. I work for the Social Council of NGOs in the office of the Executive Director. We gather here today and have been asked to close. As for the summaries of what has been transpired, indeed the questions alluded to that and elucidated a number of those issues, and a capable panel has responded to that. So I may not venture much into that one. But we're talking about rights, justice, action for all women and girls. And we want to talk about, we're gathered here to dismantle the barriers. And for us, especially in the civil society, to dismantle the barriers, we need to target accountability. Of course, accountability has a vertical and horizontal layer. So it is not only accountability for them and we are outside. Even from within us, there is a lot of perpetration that is being encountered. So we need to have both vertical and horizontal. Greetings to all. Members of the media, civil society partners, government representatives, and legal partners present today. On behalf of the Social Council of NGOs, I'm honored to speak at this moment. Why civil society organizations are important preliminary insights on gender-based violence in Lesotho. Today's activities reflect collective commitment of civil society to generate evidence that can strengthen national response to gender-based violence. These studies that have been, some of them are not yet concluded, but we alluded to today, are particularly important because Lesotho's most widely referenced GBV indicators study dates back to 2013. The work being presented today represents a crucial step towards updating our understanding of the realities women and girls continue to face. We sincerely acknowledge organizations leading these studies with the support from EU. Special appreciations to Gender Links Lesotho, our host and an important regional voice on gender justice, Lesotho Media, People's Matrix, Senuli Legal, International Commission of Jurists. These organizations continue to demonstrate the vital role of civil society in research, advocacy, and service delivery in the fight against GBV. We also acknowledge the collaboration with the program coordinating unit working within the Ministry of Justice. We recognize your presence in your role in this. Their insights from justice needs survey contribute meaningfully to understanding how survivors experience the justice system and what improvements are necessary. Importance of evidence for policy and action. Evidence generated by civil society complement government data and strengthen national dialogue, updated research, and helps improve policy and legislation, improve survivor support services, strengthen accountability and justice systems, guide development partners and national stakeholders in resource allocation. Of course, today, as we celebrate International Women's Day, we are reminded that ending violence against women is central to achieving gender equality. Research, advocacy, and collaboration between society, government, and different partners are critical steps towards Lesotho, where women and girls live free from violence. We extend sincere appreciation to the members of the media for joining us today. Your role in amplifying findings is essential in raising public awareness, encouraging national dialogue, and ensuring accountability from all stakeholders. And therefore, on behalf of civil society organizations in Lesotho, we reaffirm our commitment to working collaboratively to end GBV. We hope the insights shared today will contribute to a stronger national action and renewed commitment to protecting the rights and dignity of women and girls in Lesotho. We also want to emphasize the need for stronger collaboration amongst partners that are in here. Let today's activity be a starting point for us to work together so that we work collaboratively to address these shared challenges other than working in silos and duplicating efforts. It is an opportunity for us to work together, and once we work together in that, both different partners and government would heed to our call, and the laws that are lacking and that are sitting within chambers of parliament would be enacted, because we would be speaking in one voice that encourages and ensures that it is a representative of a wider community other than when we do it solo. So we also have had that partners in here, especially in government, the legal aid and others, they are seeking for our collaboration. The police as well, they are seeking for our collaboration, because some of the cases that we cry foul as civil society that they do not come to an end, it is because we are lagging behind in providing necessary evidence that would need to prosecute these cases. And my appeal to you, my sisters, is that most often than not, we look into our comfort zones to say sometimes that I can live with this GBV because I don't know, I have acquired status, and as a result, I don't see myself going back to the hired 2 rooms and things like those. And in so doing, you are giving a latitude for the perpetrators to show and know that women would, a number of them, they will not want to lose the comfort zone and perpetually live under this stress for the longest period. So it is inherent upon us as a society to go into the villages and tell these women that there is life. In fact, when justice is done, they will see that they will even flourish more than they were as they are living under slavery that they have endured for the longest of the time. Without much ado, I officially now close, as I was asked to come and close, and thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Lunch is ready.
Mommy, I'll see you after lunch.
After lunch? Oh, okay. I have to sort out.